Vanessa Anne Hudgens is an American actress and singer. After making her feature film debut in 13, Hudgens rose to fame portraying Gabriela Montez in the High School Musical film series, which brought her significant mainstream media success. The success of the first film led Hudgens to acquire a recording contract with Hollywood Records, with whom she released 2 studio albums, V and Identified. Since the release of her studio albums and the High School Musical franchise, Hudgens has focused on her acting career. She appeared in the films Band Slam, Beastly, Sucker Punch, Journey to The Mysterious Island, Spring Breakers, Second Act, Bad Boys for Life, and Tick, Tick, Boom. She starred in the Netflix Christmas movies The Princess Switch and its sequels and The Night Before Christmas, and co-produced the latter 3. Hudgens played the role of Emily Locke in the NBC series Powerless. She also played the title role in the Broadway musical Gigi and had roles in 2 of Fox's live musical productions, Rizzo in Grease Live and Maureen Johnson in Rent, Live. In 2022, Hudgens co-hosted the Met Gala in Manhattan. Concept and Genesis. In 1988, playwright Billy Aronson wanted to create a musical based on Puccini's La Bohème, in which the luscious splendor of Puccini's world would be replaced with the coarseness and noise of modern New York. In 1989, Jonathan Larson, a 29-year-old composer, began collaborating with Aronson on this project, and the 2 composed together Santa Fe, Splatter, and I Should Tell You. Larson suggested setting the play amid poverty, homelessness, spunky gay life, drag queens, and punk in the East Village neighborhood of Manhattan, which happened to be down the street from his Greenwich Village apartment. He also came up with the show's ultimate title. In 1991, he asked Aronson if he could use Aronson's original concept and make Rent his own. Larson had ambitious expectations for Rent. His ultimate dream was to write a rock opera to bring musical theater to the MTV generation. Aronson and Larson made an agreement that if the show went to Broadway, Aronson would share in the proceeds and be given credit for original concept and additional lyrics. Jonathan Larson focused on composing Rent in the early 1990s, waiting tables at the Moondance Diner to support himself. Over the course of years, Larson wrote hundreds of songs and made many drastic changes to the show, which in its final incarnation contained 42 songs. In the fall of 1992, Larson approached James Nicola, artistic director of New York Theatre Workshop, with a tape and copy of Rent's script. When Rent had its first staged reading at New York Theatre Workshop in March 1993, it became evident that, despite its very promising material and moving musical numbers, many structural problems needed to be addressed, including its cumbersome length and overly complex plot. As of 1994, the New York Theatre Workshop version of Rent featured songs that never made it into the final version, such as You're a Fool, Do a Little Business, the predecessor of You'll See, featuring Benny, Mark, Roger, Collins and Angel. Female to Female A and B, featuring Maureen and Joanne. He's a Fool, He Says. Right Brain, later rewritten as One Song Glory, featuring Roger. You'll Get Over It, the predecessor of Tango, Maureen, featuring Mark and Maureen. Real Estate, a number wherein Benny tries to convince Mark to become a real estate agent and drop his filmmaking. Open Road, the predecessor of What You Own, with a backing track similar to this In Your Eyes. This workshop version of Rent starred Anthony Rapp as Mark and Daphne Rubin Vega as Mimi. Larson continued to work on Rent, gradually reworking its flaws and staging more workshop productions. On January 24, 1996, after the musical's final dress rehearsal before its off-Broadway opening, Larson had his first newspaper interview with music critic Anthony Tommasini of the New York Times, attracted by the coincidence that the show was debuting exactly 100 years after Puccini's opera. Larsen would not live to see Rent's success. He died from an undiagnosed aortic aneurysm in the early morning of January 25, 1996. Friends and family gathered at the New York Theatre Workshop, and the first preview of Rent became a sing-through of the musical in Larsen's memory. The show premiered as planned and quickly gained popularity, fueled by enthusiastic reviews and the recent death of its composer. It proved extremely successful during its off-Broadway run, selling out all its shows at the 150-seat New York Theatre Workshop. Due to such overwhelming popularity and a need for a larger theatre, Rent moved to Broadway's then under renovation Nederlander Theatre and opened on 41st Street on April 29, 1996. Sources and inspiration. Larsen's inspiration for Rent's content came from several different sources. Many of the characters and plot elements are drawn directly from Giacomo Puccini's opera La Bohème, the world premiere of which was in 1896, a century before Rent's premiere. La Bohème was also about the lives of poor young artists. Tuberculosis, the plague of Puccini's opera, is replaced by HIV/AIDS in Rent. 1800s Paris is replaced by New York's East Village in the late 1980s or early 1990s. The names and identities of Rent's characters also heavily reflect Puccini's original characters, though they are not all direct adaptations. For example, Joanne in Rent represents the character of Alcindoro in Bohème, but is also partially based on Marcello. Also, Joanne is the only Rent character whose predecessor in La Bohème is a different sex. Other examples of parallels between Larsen's and Puccini's work include Larsen's song Light My Candle, which draws melodic content directly from Che gelida manina, Quando mi invio, a melody taken directly from Puccini's opera, and Goodbye Love, a long, painful piece that reflects a confrontation and parting between characters in both Puccini's and Larsen's work. Quando mi invio is paralleled in the first verse of Take Me or Leave Me, when Maureen describes the way people stare when she walks in the street. It is also directly referred to in the scene where the characters are celebrating their bohemian life. Mark says, Roger will attempt to write a bittersweet, evocative song. Roger plays a quick piece, and Mark adds, that doesn't remind us of Musetta's waltz. This part of Musetta's waltz is also later used in Your Eyes, a song Roger writes. Rent is also a somewhat autobiographical work, as Larsen incorporated many elements of his life into his show. Larsen lived in New York for many years as a starving artist with an uncertain future. He sacrificed a life of stability for his art, and shared many of the same hopes and fears as his characters. Like his characters, he endured poor living conditions, and some of these conditions made their way into the musical. Part of the motivation behind the storyline in which Maureen leaves Mark for a woman is based on the fact that Larsen's own girlfriend left him for a woman. The Mark Cohen character is based on Larsen's friends, cinematographer and producer Jonathan Burkhart and documentary filmmaker Eddie Rosenstein. Playwright Sarah Schulman alleged that Rent bore striking similarities to her novel People in Trouble. The line, I'm more of a man than you'll ever be, and more of a woman than you'll ever get, attributed to Angel Dumont Chenard at her funeral, was previously used by the character Hollywood Montrose, who appeared in the films Mannequin and Mannequin 2, On the Move. Like Angel, Hollywood performs a song and dance number and sometimes wears women's clothing. This line was originally in the film Car Wash, delivered by Antonio Fargas as a flamboyant homosexual cross-dresser. The earliest concepts of the characters differ largely from the finished products. Everyone except Mark had AIDS, including Maureen and Joanne. Maureen was a serious, angry character who played off Oedipus in her performance piece instead of Hey Diddle Diddle. Mark was, at one point, a painter instead of a filmmaker. Roger was named Ralph and wrote musical plays. Angel was a jazz philosopher, while Collins was a street performer. Angel and Collins were both originally described as Caucasian, and Benny had a somewhat enlarged role in the story, taking part in songs like Real Estate, which was later cut. Many actual locations and events are included in, or are the inspiration for, elements of the musical. Life Café, where the La Vie Boheme numbers are set, was an actual restaurant on 10th Street and Avenue B in the East Village of New York City. The riot at the end of the first act is based on the East Village riot in 1988 that arose as a result of the city-imposed curfew in Tompkins Square Park. Will I, a song which takes place during a life support meeting and expresses the pain and fear of living a life with AIDS, was inspired by a real event. Larson attended a meeting of Friends Indeed, an organization that helps people deal with illness and grief, much like life support. After that first time, Larson attended the meetings regularly. During one meeting, a man stood up and said that he was not afraid of dying. He did say, however, that there was one thing of which he was afraid: would he lose his dignity? From this question stemmed the first line of this song. The people present at the life support meeting in the show, such as Gordon, Allie, and Pam, carry the names of Larson's friends who died. In the Broadway show, the names of the characters in that particular scene were changed nightly to honor the friends of the cast members who were living with or had died from AIDS. The scene and song Life Support were also based on Friends Indeed, as well as on Gordon, Pam, and Allie. Originally, the members of Life Support had a solid block of the Forget Regret refrain, and they talked about remembering love. When Jonathan's HIV-positive friends heard this scene, they told him that having AIDS was not so easy to accept, it made you angry and resentful too, and the song did not match that. Jonathan then added a part where Gordon says that he has a problem with this credo: my T cells are low, I regret that news, okay. Paul, the leader of the meeting, replies, okay, but, Gordon, how do you feel today? Gordon admits that he is feeling the best that he has felt all year. Paul asks, then why choose fear? Gordon says, I'm a New Yorker. Fear's my life. Lynn Thompson lawsuit. Lynn Thompson was a dramaturg who was hired by New York Theatre Workshop to help rework Rent. She claimed that between early May and the end of October 1995, she and Larson co-wrote a new version of the musical. She sued Jonathan Larson's estate for $40 million and sought 16% of the show's royalties, claiming she had written a significant portion of the lyrics and the libretto of the new version of Rent. During the trial, according to a partner in the firm representing the Larson estate, Thompson could not recall the lyrics to the songs that she allegedly wrote, nor the structures of the libretto she claimed to have created. The judge ruled against her and gave Larson's estate full credit and right to Rent. A federal appellate court upheld the original ruling on appeal. In August 1998, the case was settled out of court. The terms of the settlement were not disclosed. In a subsequent statement, actor Anthony Rapp stated he believed that Thompson deserved more compensation for her contributions as dramaturg and that Larson himself would have agreed had he lived. However, Rapp felt that Thompson's choice to sue for co-authorship only after Rent had become popular and in turn only a few months after Larson's death seemed incredibly cruel. Synopsis. Act I. Christmas Eve in Manhattan's East Village. Two roommates Mark, a filmmaker, and Roger, a rock musician struggle to stay warm and produce their art. Mark's mother leaves him a voicemail wishing him a Merry Christmas and trying to comfort him since his ex-girlfriend Maureen dumped him. Their friend Tom Collins, a gay anarchist professor of computer-age philosophy at New York University, calls and plans to surprise them at their apartment, but is mugged before entering. At the same time, Mark, and Roger's former roommate and friend Benny, who has since become their harsh new landlord, has reneged on an earlier agreement and now demands last year's rent, before shutting down their electrical power. However, Mark and Roger rebel and resolve not to pay the rent they cannot pay and which they were promised would not be a problem. Meanwhile, Angel, a cross-dressing street drummer, finds Collins wounded in an alley and tends to him. The two are immediately attracted to each other, each learning that the other is HIV positive. It is revealed that Roger also has HIV, which he contracted from his last girlfriend, who died by suicide after learning of her diagnosis, causing Roger to fall into depression. Mark leaves the loft while Roger stays home, trying to compose on his guitar without success. He wishes desperately to write one last song to be remembered by before he dies. Their neighbor, Mimi, who is an exotic dancer and junkie, shows up at their apartment asking for help with lighting her candle, flirting with Roger in the process. However, he is clearly hesitant to return her affections. Meanwhile, Joanne, a lawyer and Maureen's girlfriend, receives a voicemail from her parents. At last, the missing Collins enters the apartment, presenting Angel, who is now in full drag and shares the money she made and the amusing story of how she killed a dog to earn it. Mark comes home, and Benny arrives, speaking of Maureen's upcoming protest against his plans to evict the homeless from a lot where he is hoping to build a cyber arts studio. Benny offers that, if they convince Maureen to cancel the protest, then Mark and Roger can officially remain rent-free tenants. However, the two rebuff Benny's offer and he leaves. Mark leaves the loft again to go help Maureen with the sound equipment for the protest, unexpectedly meeting Joanne at the stage. Initially hesitant with each other, the two eventually bond over their shared distrust of Maureen's gaslighting and promiscuous behavior. Mark then joins Collins and Angel to film their HIV support group meeting, while Mimi attempts to seduce Roger alone in his apartment. Roger is extremely upset by Mimi's intrusion, demanding she leave him alone and resisting any romantic feelings he may harbor for her. After Mimi leaves, Roger reflects on his fear of dying an undignified death from AIDS, while the life support group echoes his thoughts. Collins, Mark, and Angel protect a homeless woman from police harassment using Mark's camera, but she chastises them because she believes they only did it so Mark can make a name for himself from her situation. To lighten the mood, Collins talks about his dream of escaping New York City to open a restaurant in Santa Fe. Soon, Mark leaves to check up on Roger. While alone, Collins and Angel confess their love for each other. Joanne hectically prepares for Maureen's show, trying to balance all the people calling her at once. Before the performance, Roger apologizes to Mimi, inviting her to come to the protest and the dinner party his friends are having afterwards. At the same time, police, vendors, and homeless people prepare for the protest. Maureen begins her avant-garde, if not over-the-top, performance based on Hey Diddle Diddle. At the post-show party at the Life Cafe, Benny arrives, criticizing the protest and the group's bohemian lifestyle. In response, Mark and his group defiantly rise up to celebrate their way of living. Mimi and Roger each discover that the other is HIV positive and hesitantly decide to move forward with their relationship. Joanne explains that Mark and Roger's building has been padlocked and a riot has broken out. Roger and Mimi, unaware, share their first kiss. The celebration continues. Act 2. The cast lines up to sing together before the plot of the second act begins, affirming that one should measure life in love. On New Year's Eve, Mark, Mimi, Roger, Maureen, Joanne, Collins, and Angel gather to break back into Mark and Roger's apartment which they have been locked out of. Once Mark, Joanne, and Maureen break in through the window, a voicemail reveals that Mark's footage of the riot has earned him a job offering at a tabloid news company called Buzzline. The others finally break through the door just as Benny arrives, saying he wants to call a truce and revealing that Mimi, who used to be his girlfriend, convinced him to change his mind. Mimi denies rekindling her relationship with Benny, but Roger is upset, and although they apologize to each other, Mimi goes to her drug dealer for a fix. Around Valentine's Day, Mark tells the audience that Roger and Mimi have been living together, that Collins and Angel are nowhere to be found, and that Maureen and Joanne are preparing another protest. During rehearsal, Maureen criticizes Joanne's controlling behavior, and Joanne criticizes Maureen's promiscuous mannerisms. They break up dramatically following an ultimatum. Time progresses to spring, but Roger and Mimi's relationship is strained by Mimi's escalating heroin usage and Roger's lasting jealousy and suspicion of Benny. Each alone, Roger and Mimi sing of love and loneliness, telling each other how they feel, as they watch Collins nurse Angel, whose health is declining due to AIDS. By the end of the summer, Mark continues to receive calls offering a corporate job at Buzzline. A dance is performed representing all the couple's sex lives. At the climax of the number, the two former couples break up, and Angel suddenly dies. At the funeral, the friends briefly come together to share their memories, with Collins being the last to reminisce. Mark expresses his fear of being the only one left surviving when the rest of his friends die of AIDS, and he finally accepts the corporate job offer. Roger reveals that he is leaving for Santa Fe, which sparks an argument about commitment between him and Mimi, and between Maureen and Joanne. Collins arrives and admonishes the entire group for fighting on the day of Angel's funeral, causing Maureen and Joanne to reconcile, but not Mimi and Roger. The group shares a sad moment, knowing that between deaths and leaving, their close-knit friendships will be breaking up. Everyone leaves except Mark and Roger, and so Mark tries to convince Roger to stay in New York. Roger, unable to handle Mimi's declining health, becomes angry with Mark and leaves. Mimi returns to say goodbye, overhears everything Roger says, and, terrified, agrees to go to rehab, which Benny pays for. Collins is forcibly removed from the church for being unable to pay for Angel's funeral. Benny shows compassion by paying and offering Mark and Collins drinks. Collins accepts, causing the latter and Benny to rekindle their old friendship, but Mark has to turn down the offer due to work commitments. Some time later, both Mark and Roger simultaneously reach an artistic epiphany, as Roger finds his song in Mimi and Mark finds his film in Angel's memory. Roger decides to return to New York in time for Christmas, while Mark quits his job to devote his efforts to working on his own film. The characters' parents, concerned and confused about their respective situations, leave several worried messages on their phones. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year having passed, Mark prepares to screen his now completed film to his friends. Roger has written his song, but no one can find Mimi for him to play it to. Benny's wife, discovering Benny's relationship with Mimi, has pulled Benny out of the East Village. The power suddenly blows and Collins enters with handfuls of cash, revealing that he reprogrammed an ATM at a grocery store to provide money to anybody with the code Angel. Maureen and Joanne abruptly enter carrying Mimi, who had been homeless and is now weak and close to death. She begins to fade, telling Roger that she loves him. Roger tells her to hold on as he plays her the song he wrote for her, revealing the depth of his feelings for her. Mimi appears to die, but abruptly awakens, claiming to have been heading into a white light before a vision of Angel appeared, telling her to go back and stay with Roger. The remaining friends gather together in a final moment of shared happiness and resolve to enjoy whatever time they have left with each other, affirming that there is no day but today. Musical numbers. Roles. Main characters. Mark Cohen, a struggling Jewish-American documentary filmmaker and the narrator of the show. He is Roger's roommate. At the start of the show, he has recently been dumped by Maureen. Roger Davis, a once successful but now struggling musician and ex-lead singer and rock guitarist who is HIV positive and an ex-junkie. He hopes to write one last meaningful song before he dies. He has difficulty coping with his own mortality as well as that of his friends. His girlfriend, April, killed herself after finding out that she was HIV positive. He is roommates with Mark. Mimi Marquez, a Latina stripper and drug addict. She lives downstairs from Mark and Roger, is Roger's love interest, and, like him, is HIV positive. She is also Benny's ex-lover. Tom Collins, an anarchist professor with AIDS. He is described by Mark as a computer genius, teacher, and vagabond anarchist who ran naked through the Parthenon. Collins dreams of opening a restaurant in Santa Fe, where the problems in New York will not affect him and his friends. He was formerly a roommate of Roger, Mark, Benny, and Maureen, now just Roger and Mark, until he moves out. Angel Dumont Chenard, a young drag queen who is addressed as a female when in drag and as a male when out of drag. Angel, who has AIDS, is a street percussionist with a generous disposition, Collins' love interest. Maureen Johnson, a performance artist who is Mark's ex-girlfriend and Joanne's current girlfriend. She is very flirtatious and cheated on Mark. Larson considered Maureen a lesbian, despite her previous relationships with men, and he specifically identified her as lesbian in the script itself. Joanne Jefferson, an Ivy League-educated public interest lawyer and a lesbian. Joanne is the woman for whom Maureen left Mark. Joanne has very politically powerful parents. Benjamin Benny Coffin III, the landlord of Mark, Roger, and Mimi's apartment building and ex-roommate of Mark, Collins, Roger, and Maureen. Now married to Allison Gray of the Westport Grays, a very wealthy family involved in real estate, and he is considered yuppie scum and a sellout by his ex-roommates. He at one time had a relationship with Mimi. Minor characters. Mrs. Cohen, Mark's stereotypical Jewish mother. Her voicemail messages are the basis for the songs Voicemail Number 1, Voicemail Number 3, and Voicemail Number 5. Alexi Darling, the producer of Buzzline, a sleazy tabloid company that tries to employ Mark after his footage of the riot makes primetime. Sings Voicemail Number 3 and Voicemail Number 4. Mr. and Mrs. Jefferson, the wealthy parents of Joanne Jefferson, they leave her Voicemail Number 2. Mr. Jefferson is also one of the a cappella singers in Voicemail Number 5. Mr. and Mrs. Jefferson usually sing the solos in Seasons of Love. Mrs. Davis, Roger's confused mother who calls in Voicemail Number 5, asking continuously, "Roger, where are you?" Mrs. Marquez, Mimi's Spanish-speaking mother who sings in Voicemail Number 5, wondering, in Spanish, where she is. Mr. Gray, Benny's father-in-law who wants to buy out the lot. The Man, the local drug dealer whom Mimi buys from and Roger used to buy from. Based on the character Parpignol from La Boheme. Paul, the man in charge of the life support group. Gordon, one of the life support members. Steve, one of the life support members. Allie, one of the life support members. Pam, one of the life support members. Sue, one of the life support members. In Larson's script, the roles of all of the life support members are encouraged to take on the name that someone in the cast knows or has known to have succumbed to AIDS. In the final Broadway performance, Sue is renamed Lisa. Squeegee Man, a homeless person who chants honest living, over and over during Christmas bells. The Waiter, a waiter at Life Cafe. The Woman with Bags or Homeless Woman, a woman who calls Mark out for trying to use her to assuage his guilt during On the Street. The Preacher or the Pastor, the preacher kicks Collins out of the church because he can't pay for Angel's funeral. There are also many other non-named roles such as cops, bohemians, vendors, homeless people. In professional productions, all the minor characters are played by the 7 members of the ensemble. The usual doubling is as follows. Mark's mother/Pam. Mrs. Jefferson/woman with bags/coat vendor/ Mimi's mother/Allie/Seasons of Love soloist. Alexi Darling/Roger's mother/Sue. Mr. Jefferson/Christmas caroler/ preacher/ Seasons of Love soloist. Gordon/the man/ Mr. Gray. Steve/waiter/ squeegee man. Paul/cop/vendor. Reception. Rent received several awards including a Pulitzer Prize and 4 Tony Awards. Critical reception of Rent was positive not only for its acting and musical components, but also for its representation of HIV-positive individuals. Many critics praised the portrayal of characters such as Angel and Collins as being happy, with positive outlooks on life, rather than being resigned to death. While critics and theater patrons had largely positive reviews of the show, it was criticized for its stereotypically negative portrayal of lesbian characters and the glamorization of the East Village in the late 1980s. Billy Aronson said, "For the record, although I was ambivalent about Jonathan's ideas for Rent when we were working together on it, I have come to love the show. And as tragic as it is that he didn't live to see his work become a huge success, I believe he knew it would be." In our last conversation I asked how the show was going and he said, with complete assurance, that it was incredible. Cultural impact and legacy. The song Seasons of Love became a successful pop song and often is performed on its own. Because of its connection to New Year's and looking back at times past, it is sometimes performed at graduations or school holiday programs. Rent heads. Rent gathered a following of fans who refer to themselves as Rent heads. The name originally referred to people who would camp out at the Nederlander Theater for hours in advance for the discounted $20 rush tickets to each show, though it generally refers to anyone who is obsessed with the show. These discounted tickets were for seats in the first 2 rows of the theater reserved for sale by lottery 2 hours prior to each show. Other Broadway shows have followed Rent's example and now also offer cheaper tickets in efforts to make Broadway theater accessible to people who would otherwise be unable to afford the ticket prices. Popular culture references. The film Team America, World Police includes a character who plays a lead role in Lease, a Broadway musical parody of Rent. In 2017, the song Out Tonight was covered by the characters Josie and the Pussycats in an episode of the television series Riverdale. Satirist Randy Rainbow parodied Seasons of Love as Seasons of Trump for his 2021 look back at the Trump administration, and Tango, Maureen as Tango, vaccine to highlight purveyors of COVID-19 misinformation. Rent has also been referenced in other musicals. Yitzhak in Hedwig and the Angry Inch wears a Rent t-shirt and speaks of his aspiration to play the role of Angel. The off-Broadway musical review Forbidden Broadway Strikes Back includes parodies of Rent songs such as Rent, Ouch, They're Tight, Season of Hype, Too Gay for You, Pretty Voices Singing and This Ain't Boheme. Lin-Manuel Miranda, the composer and writer of the Broadway show Hamilton, has cited Rent as a main source of inspiration. He also referenced the show in a verse of the song Rode My Way Out on the Hamilton mixtape in the line Running Out of Time like I'm Jonathan Larson's Rent check. Casts. Notable replacements. Broadway. First, second and third U.S. national tours. Productions. New York workshops and off-Broadway production. Rent had its first staged reading at New York Theatre Workshop in March 1993. A further 2-week New York Theatre Workshop version was performed in 1994 starring Anthony Rapp as Mark and Daphne Rubin Vega as Mimi, and more workshops followed. The show opened in 1996, again at New York Theatre Workshop, and quickly gained popularity off-Broadway, receiving enthusiastic reviews. The New York Times theater critic Ben Brantley called it an exhilarating, landmark rock opera with a glittering, inventive score that shimmers with hope for the future of the American musical. Another reviewer wrote, Rent speaks to Generation X the way that the musical Hair spoke to the baby boomers or those who grew up in the 1960s, while the New York Times similarly called it a rock opera for our time, a Hair for the 90s. The show proved extremely successful off-Broadway, selling out all of its performances at the 150-seat theater. Original Broadway production. Due to its overwhelming popularity and the need for a larger theater, Rent moved to Broadway's previously derelict Nederlander Theater on 41st Street on April 29, 1996. On Broadway, the show achieved critical acclaim and word-of-mouth popularity. The production's ethnically diverse principal cast originally included Taye Diggs, Wilson Germain Heredia, Jesse L. Martin, Edina Menzel, Adam Pascal, Anthony Rapp, Daphne Rubin Vega, and Freddie Walker. The production's controversial topics and innovative pricing, including same-day of performance $20 tickets, helped to increase the popularity of musical theater amongst the younger generation. The production was nominated for 10 Tony Awards in 1996 and won 4, Best Musical, Best Book, Best Original Score and Best Performance by a Featured Actor in a Musical on April 24, 2006. The original Broadway cast reunited for a one-night performance of the musical at the Nederlander Theater. This performance raised over $2 million for the Jonathan Larson Performing Arts Foundation, Friends Indeed and New York Theater Workshop. Former cast members were invited, and many from prior tours and former Broadway casts appeared, performing an alternate version of Seasons of Love as the finale of the performance. Rent closed on September 7, 2008, after a 12-year run and 5,123 performances, making it the 7th longest-running Broadway show at that time, and currently the 11th longest-running Broadway show. The production grossed over $280 million. Original cast ensemble members Rodney Hicks and Gwen Stewart returned to the cast at the time of the Broadway closing. Hicks played Benny and Stewart played the role she created, the soloist in the song Seasons of Love. In addition, actress Tracy Toms joined the cast at the end of the run playing Joanne, the role she portrayed in the 2005 film version. The last Broadway performance was filmed and screened in movie theaters as Rent, filmed live on Broadway in September 2008. It was released on DVD and Blu-ray formats on February 3, 2009. North American touring productions. Successful United States national tours, the Angel Tour and the Benny Tour, launched in the 1990s. Later, the Non-Equity Tour started its run. There was also a Canadian tour. The Angel Tour began in November 1996 at the Shubert Theatre in Boston, where it ran for approximately 6 months. Anthony Rapp joined the cast for the Chicago run, and Daphne Rubin Vega joined for the Los Angeles run. The tour finished in San Francisco in September 1999. Other members of the Angel cast included Carrie Hamilton, Amy Spanger, Luther Creek, Christopher Cusick, Lisa Simone, Queen Esther, and Tony Vincent. The Benny Tour began in July 1997 in San Diego, California, at the La Jolla Playhouse. Michael Greif, the original director of the Broadway show, was also the artistic director of the La Jolla Playhouse and was instrumental in arranging for the Benny Tour to begin in the smaller city of San Diego rather than Los Angeles, California. It originally featured Neil Patrick Harris as Mark Cohen in his first musical theater role. The Benny Tour generally played shorter stops and often smaller markets than the Angel Tour did. Other cast members included Wilson Cruz and Dee Monroe. Tours ran each season from 2005 to 2008. Cast members throughout the run included Aaron Tveit, Ava Gaudette, Declan Bennett, Rebecca Naomi Jones, Constantine Maroulis, Dan Rosenbaum, Heinz Winkler, Anwar Robinson, Christine Dwyer, Casey Levy, and Karen Olivo. In 2009, a national tour starring Adam Pascal and Anthony Rapp, reprising their original Broadway roles, launched in Cleveland, Ohio. Original Broadway cast member Gwen Stewart also appeared, alongside Michael McElroy as Collins. The tour ended on February 7, 2010, in Sacramento, California. A 20th anniversary non-equity touring production began in Bloomington, Indiana on September 12, 2016, and ran through March 1, 2020. A 25th anniversary non-equity tour kicked off on September 30, 2021, at the Carson Center in Paducah, Kentucky. UK Productions. The show made its UK premiere on April 21, 1998, at the West End's Shaftesbury Theatre and officially opened on May 12, 1998. The original cast included Kristen Cummings as Mimi Marquez, Wilson Germain Heredia as Angel Chouinard, Bonnie Lockhart as Benny, Jesse L. Martin as Tom Collins, Adam Pascal as Roger Davis, Anthony Rapp as Mark Cohen, and Jessica Teasier as Maureen Johnson. The show closed on October 30, 1999, after 1.5 years. Limited revivals took place at the Prince of Wales Theatre from December 4, 2001 to January 6, 2002, December 6, 2002 to March 1, 2003. There was also a successful production for a limited run in Manchester in 2006 with an additional goodbye performance in 2008 from the Manchester cast. On October 16, 2007, the heavily revised production titled Rent Remixed opened at the Duke of York's Theatre in London's West End. Directed by William Baker, it was set in the present day. The cast included Oliver Thornton, Luke Evans, Craig Stein, Leon Lopez, Francesca Jackson, Jay Webb, Siobhan Donaghy, and Denise Van Outen. From December 24, 2007, the role of Maureen was played by Jessie Wallace. The production received generally unfavorable reviews. The Guardian gave it only 1 out of 5 stars, writing, "They call this Rent Remixed. I'd dub it Rent Reduced, in that the late Jonathan Larson's reworking of La Boheme, while never a great musical, has been turned into a grisly, synthetic, pseudo-pop concert with no particular roots or identity." The production closed on February 2, 2008. The production radically altered elements of the musical, including defining the characters of Mimi, Angel, and Mark as British. Songs were reordered. The rehaul of the score was masterminded by Steve Anderson and featured radically rearranged versions of Out Tonight, Today for You, Over the Moon and Happy New Year. A one-off Rent, the 20th anniversary concert was held at the Blackpool Opera House Monday, November 11, 2013. A 20th anniversary tour opened at Theatre CLWID in October 2016 before playing a 2-month run at the St James Theatre, London. The cast included Leighton Williams as Angel and Lucy Jones as Maureen. The production then continued to tour the UK. In 2018, an immersive production of Rent premiered at Frogmore Paper Mill in Apsley, Hemel Hempstead. The cast included Aaron McRae, Connor Dyer, and Lizzie Emery. The show opened on July 10, 2018, and ran until July 28. In 2020, the musical was revived at Manchester's Hope Mill Theatre for a limited run from October 30 to December 6. The production was originally scheduled to begin in late July but was delayed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Due to the ongoing pandemic, the audience was socially distanced and measures were in place around the theatre. The cast included Blake Patrick Anderson, Tom Francis, Myaquansa Breed, Dom Hartley Harris, Alex Thomas Smith, Millie O'Connell, Jocasta Almjul, and Ahmed Hamid. The production was professionally filmed, which was broadcast from November 27 to December 20 on weekends. Off-Broadway revival. The show was revived off-Broadway at Stage 1 of New World Stages with previews starting July 14, 2011, and a scheduled opening of August 11, 2011. This was the first New York revival of the show since the original production closed less than 3 years earlier. The production was directed by Rent's original director Michael Grief. Almost the entire show was different from the original, yet the reinvention did not please the critics, who complained that the new actors did not have a feel for the characters they were playing and that it made the show feel contrived. The off-Broadway production of Rent closed on September 9, 2012. Additional productions. In 1999, an Australian production featured Justin Smith as Mark, Roger Corser as Roger and Christine Anu as Mimi. The tour began in Sydney and finished in Melbourne. A production in Perth, Western Australia was mounted in 2007 and featured Anthony Callia as Mark, Tim Campbell as Roger, Courtney Act as Angel and Nikki Webster as Maureen. The Dublin production had an extended run at the Olympia Theatre, Dublin in 2000. It starred Sean Paul McGreevy as Mark, Rachel Tucker as Maureen and Alison Brown as Mimi under the direction of Phil Wilmot. The Swedish production premiered in January 2001 at Götalegend, Sweden, with an extensive national tour the following year. Sarah Dawn Finer played Joanne. The first Swedish production had an altered ending, later productions has kept the original ending. Rent veteran Neil Patrick Harris directed a production at the Hollywood Bowl in Los Angeles, CA. The production played a 3-night engagement, August 6-8, 2010. The cast included Vanessa Hudgens as Mimi, Aaron Tveit as Roger, Skyla Aston as Mark, Wayne Brady as Collins, Telly Leung as Angel, Tracy Toms as Joanne, Nicole Schertzinger as Maureen, Collins Penny as Benny, and Gwen Stewart as Seasons of Love soloist. In 2017, the first tour for the German-speaking countries was mounted by Berlin theatrical producer Boris Hilbert. The leading German musical theater magazine Musicals, Das Musical Magazine, described the production as, in terms of vocal quality, the performance was one of the best that has ever been seen in Germany. The show traveled Germany, Austria, and Switzerland and was directed by the British opera director Walter Sutcliffe. I Rent, School Edition /I. None. International productions. Rent has been performed in countries around the world, including Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Belgium, the Netherlands, Ireland, United Kingdom, France, Germany, Switzerland, Portugal, Spain, Italy, Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, Greece, Canada, the United States, Mexico, Panama, Bolivia, Brazil, Argentina, Russia, China, Hong Kong, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, South Africa, Australia, Guam, New Zealand, Israel, Puerto Rico, Austria, Peru, Trinidad and Tobago, Dominican Republic, Cuba, Czech Republic, Colombia, and Guatemala. The musical has been performed in 25 languages: Danish, Estonian, Finnish, Icelandic, Norwegian, Swedish, Dutch, English, French, German, Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, Hungarian, Polish, Slovak, Greek, Russian, Mandarin Chinese, Cantonese Chinese, Korean, Japanese, Hebrew, Czech, and Catalan. Recordings. I Rent /I. None. I Rent, Original Motion Picture Soundtrack /I. None. Other recordings. There are also many foreign cast recordings of international productions of the show. Adaptations. Film. In 2005, Rent was adapted into a movie directed by Chris Columbus with a screenplay by Stephen Chbosky. With the exception of Daphne Rubin Vega and Freddie Walker, who played Mimi and Joanne respectively. The original Broadway cast members reprised the principal roles. Released on November 23, 2005, the film remained in the box office top 10 for 3 weeks, receiving mixed reviews. Several plot elements were changed slightly, and some songs were changed to spoken dialogue or cut entirely for the film. The soundtrack was produced by Rob Cavallo, engineered by Doug McKean, and features renowned session musicians Jamie Muhobarak, Tim Pierce, and Dorian Crozier. I Rent, filmed live on Broadway/I. None. I Rent, live/I. None. Related documentaries. I Know Day But Today, the story of Rent/I. None. I Revolution Rent/I. None. Awards and honors. Original Broadway production. Due to its overwhelming popularity and the need for a larger theater, Rent moved to Broadway's previously derelict Nederlander Theater on 41st Street on April 29, 1996. On Broadway, the show achieved critical acclaim and word-of-mouth popularity. The production's ethnically diverse principal cast originally included Taye Diggs, Wilson Germain Heredia, Jesse L. Martin, Edina Menzel, Adam Pascal, Anthony Rapp, Daphne Rubin Vega, and Freddie Walker. The production's controversial topics and innovative pricing, including same-day of performance $20 tickets, helped to increase the popularity of musical theater amongst the younger generation. The production was nominated for 10 Tony Awards in 1996 and won 4: Best Musical, Best Book, Best Original Score and Best Performance by a Featured Actor in a Musical. On April 24, 2006, the original Broadway cast reunited for a one-night performance of the musical at the Nederlander Theater. This performance raised over $2 million for the Jonathan Larson Performing Arts Foundation, Friends Indeed and New York Theater Workshop. Former cast members were invited, and many from prior tours and former Broadway casts appeared, performing an alternate version of Seasons of Love as the finale of the performance. Rent closed on September 7, 2008, after a 12-year run and 5,123 performances, making it the 7th longest-running Broadway show at that time, and currently the 11th longest-running Broadway show. The production grossed over $280 million. Original cast ensemble members Rodney Hicks and Gwen Stewart returned to the cast at the time of the Broadway closing. Hicks played Benny and Stewart played the role she created, the soloist in the song Seasons of Love. In addition, actress Tracy Toms joined the cast at the end of the run playing Joanne, the role she portrayed in the 2005 film version. The last Broadway performance was filmed and screened in movie theaters as Rent, filmed live on Broadway in September 2008. It was released on DVD and Blu-ray formats on February 3, 2009.